Welcome. In this session I would like to explain to you how to use functions in Windows PowerShell. A function is a named section of a program that performs a specific task. We could also say a function is a type of procedure or routine. In PowerShell we can use a function to perform operations or procedures. Before I start, I need to make sure that you have a full understanding of variables, aliases, parameters, loops, the if statement, operators, and how to use the pipeline in Windows PowerShell. If you are unsure or you would like to refresh your memory, please view one of my earlier sessions. Unlike in other program languages, in PowerShell the functions need to be declared in the beginning of our script. They are read into memory and can then be accessed by specifying their name. To declare a function, we need to specify the function, followed by the name of the function we would like to use. Then we can use the command block to specify a procedure or operation we would like this function to do. In this example, we are creating a function called date. We will run the commandlet getDate in the command block. To call the function, we just need to specify the name of the function that we have created. There are three ways to pass parameters into a function. Firstly, we can do so by specifying them in a variable in round brackets. We can pass the parameters to our function by adding them with a space character between them. So we call the name and then we just specify the variables that we would like to add, or the parameters. The second way would be to use the param block within the function. In this example, our function is called add_param, and then we use the param block to specify the parameters. We can pass the parameters to our function in the same way as before. The third way is to use arguments. The arguments variable allows us to access the information specified on the command line. Here is an example how to use the argument variable in a function. We call the function name, then we specify the arguments with round brackets or square brackets. 0 means the first argument, 1 means the second argument. To pass the parameters or arguments, we can just specify the function name and then specify the arguments that we would like to use, just the same way as we did before. If our function relies on specific data, we can set up our parameters with data types. We can do so by specifying the data type in a square bracket in front of the variable name that we would like to declare. If we would like our function to react with default values, we can do so by specifying the value that we would like our variable to have. We are setting a parameter variable x to have a default value of 9 and the parameter variable y to be 1. This can also be done in the param block. To be able to create a function that are not dependent on a certain number of parameters, we can use loops to go through each parameter and perform an operation on it. Examples for loops are for each object, while, do while, and do until. The return keyword exits a function. It can be used to exit a scope at a specific point, to return a value, or to indicate that the end of scope has been reached. In Windows PowerShell, by default, the result of each statement is returned as output, even without a statement that contains a return key. Therefore, it is not necessary to specify a value with a return key to return any output. The input variable allows a function to access data coming from the pipeline. In this way, we can pipe a command to a function. This could be useful if we, for example, are searching for something. Here is an example of the pipeline function. We specify the name of the function. Then in the command block, we use the input variable to indicate that we are waiting for a command that will be piped into the function. Then we specify what should happen with the pipe input. In this case, we are searching for an object where the name is equal to Windows. To call the function, we need to specify a command that it can be piped. In this case, we are using the commandlet get child items with the path to the C drive. Then we use the pipe and call our function by name. Okay, let's wrap this up with a couple of examples in Windows PowerShell ISE. Okay, I've opened Windows PowerShell and I'll start off with demonstrating to you how to work with functions. To create a function, we need to specify the word function and then the name of the function, and then in the command block we need to specify what the function should do. So I'll just create this simple function that will get the date, create it, I'll just run that and that reads it into memory. Then I can call it by just specifying the name. Okay, up next I'll show you how to work with parameters. One way is to just specify them up at the top in round brackets. So in this case we are using or creating a parameter int x, int y, and then we're adding them together and returning the answer. Okay, I'll create the function. To pass the parameters, we call the name of the function, then put a space character, and then separate the parameters with a space character. So if I add those two parameters in, it's going to add them together, and the answer is 79. Up next, we can do exactly the same by using the param block, that is this part, and otherwise the function looks exactly the same. So I'll create the function, and again I'll call the name and pass my two parameters, and it will add those two together. Up next, to create a dynamic function, we can use for each loops. So what I'm doing is I am creating a function with only one parameter. So down here you'll notice that they are separated by commas. That way I can use each value in the array and then do something with that. So I'll create my function. This way I can only pass two parameters. I could pass 3 parameters. I could pass 4, and so on. However many characters I would like to pass into my function. Okay, up next I'll show you how to work with arguments. We create a function called hello, and then we just return a string called what are you doing, and then the argument name. So if I create my function, then I can just pass today into my function, and it will return what are you doing today. To make this a dynamic function, I'm using the for each object loop, and I'll return a value for every single argument I'm passing into the function. So I can either just pass one argument, I could pass 2 arguments, and so on. If I just pass 4 arguments, it will just return all 4 statements. Okay, up next, if we are working with multiple arguments, we need to specify them, or specify each argument with a square bracket. 0 means that it's the first argument, 1 means that it's the second argument. So if I create my function and then just pass 45 and 63 into that, it will add those two together because it's got a plus there. There we go. It just adds those two values together. To make this a dynamic function, we are going to use the for loop, and the for loop will start at 0, and then if I is less than the count of arguments that we have, that's how long the loop will run, and we'll just adding the arguments together. So I'll create my function, and then I can either just add 2 values, it will add them together. I can just add another value, and how many values I would like to, or arguments I would like to pass into my function. Okay, up next I'll show you how to work with data types. To do that, we need to specify our data type in square brackets in front of the variable that we are defining. So I'll run my function. Now if I call my function with an integer, it depends on an integer, my function will work and it will return the string that I've specified it to return. But if I actually specify or pass the parameter as a string into my function, I will get an error message that my function depends on integers. To work with error messages, I've modified my function with an if statement. So I'm just saying, if it's not an integer, then it should return a value, and if it's an integer, it should just return my string. So if I pass a string into that value, into the function, I will get returned the value needs to be an integer, but if I pass an integer into my function, it actually returns the proper value. Okay, up next I'll demonstrate to you how to work with default values. In this case, we are creating a default value for the variable x to be 9, the variable y will be 1. So I'll create my function. This way, this can be used if if somebody does not add a value, it automatically adds those values. So if I call my function without any values, it will automatically take those two specified or default values and add them together. If I only add one variable or one parameter, it will use the second parameter, so the 1, as the default value for the other one. And if I pass both values, it will ignore the default values and just add the parameters that have been passed into the function. Okay, up next I'll show you how the return key works. The return key will exit the function. So I've written a function that looks through or gets the child items of C and then checks if the directory has a name in it, and if it does, then it will exit the function. And it will not execute this command down here. So I'll create my function. Oops. Then if I call does Windows exist, and it does exist, that's why it only gets to the return and does not execute the next statement or next command. All right, up next I'll demonstrate you how to use the pipeline function. We are creating a function called find text file. Then we tell it that we are expecting a pipeline input. Then we use the pipeline and we are specifying where the object name equals to test.txt, and then just formatting the table by name or full name. So I'll create my function. Then to call the function, I need to pipe something into the function. In this case, I am calling the commandlet getChildItems with the path ctest. Recursive just means that I'm calling all the subfolders, and then I'll pipe that into my function. And you notice that the file text.txt is underneath all these folders from folder 0, all the subfolders from folder 0 all the way to folder number 7. I've just created another function that sort of does the same. This time I'm not looking for files, I'm just looking for directory names. So if I call my function, it will return where that folder or where the folders are that have the word like folder inside of them. Okay, up next, this could be a live or a function that you could use every day. I'm calling processor information. I'm using the commandlet getWMI object, and the class that I'm looking for is a processor, and then it should return all the information of that processor. So I'll create my function. Oops, that was a bit too far. Okay, and then to call the function, I specify the name and then localhost as my computer name. It will take a while and it will return the processor information of my computer. We can also do that with the disk information. So just create another function that uses the getWMI object. This time I'm calling a disk drive, and then it should return the information of that drive. So if I create that function and if I call that again with the local host as the computer name, it will return the information of the disk drives that I have in my local host. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the session and I'm looking forward to our next one.